The King of the Battlefield Chapter 41. Chapter 41, Azura, 5. TL, Yoni. Edited, Yoni, Mayanai. Sponsored, Anonymous. The flying-type monsters only existed in specific areas and they didn't exist around the great city. However, if he made a flying undead in advance, there could be many places where it could be useful. Of course, harpies had too many flaws to be considered strong monsters. Not only were they small, they lacked individual fighting power. However, they lived in flocks and possessed a decent paralyzing poison. The poison resided in their feathers, and by throwing their feathers like darts, they were able to paralyze their prey. The harpies were the type of monsters that would swarm in with overwhelming numbers to fight for meat and would not leave a single trace of it on their victims' bones. A good 5,000 harpies. He estimated with a glance, but it seemed pretty close. Myung hid his body in a shady area under a bookshelf. Susie followed right behind him with her hands covering her mouth. Since her figure was already small, she wasn't the type to stand out even without the use of stealth abilities. Like this, normal people would move from a bookshelf to another to avoid harpies' eyes and protect their lives. Normally, trials like this were probably made on the premise that people would hide. Myung lowered his body and took out a dagger as he moved slowly. When it said that the library's structure had been changed, it meant that there was a space provided somewhere for the harpies. Myung's primary goal was to raid that location and make harpies into undead. Fighting many mediocre opponents was a golden opportunity for necromancer-type classes to shine. However, necromancer was a secret class. For example, Myung possessed a lord class. That meant that an incredibly limited number could act the way Myung did, and even that was impossible without strong determination. Either way, the Sky Library was a place people couldn't enter if one of their stats were over 100. None of the challengers could move freely facing thousands of harpies. As expected, there was a pond in a corner of the room. About a dozen harpies were in a line, drinking water. "Stay here." Myung mouthed and gestured to Susie. As if she was nervous, she nodded her head. A single mistake could produce a fatal result. There was no way Susie didn't know this with her keen sense of survival that was better than anyone else. Myung picked up a small rock nearby and threw it as far as he could. Plop! K-w! K-w! Like a crow, they gave out a loud cry and flew towards the sound. They only sounded similar. Harpies had a lower level of intelligence than the crows. Before he knew, only 5 harpies were left paddling in the pond. Taking advantage of the timing, he took out 5 small daggers from his side. It was one of the items he bought in the great city to prepare for assassinations. He held a dagger after placing 4 down. By adjusting the speed and the timing of his throw, he needed to make sure that all 5 would collapse almost at the same time. It was a highly advanced problem for Myung in his current state. If it was him in the past, he would have been able to shoot out the daggers like flowing water and could have ended it before any of the 5 could react. However, Myung objectively accepted the fact that his current body was different from the body he had in the past. First, slowly. Swoosh. The dagger was well sharpened. Once it made contact with the harpy's skin, it would easily rip into it. The dagger was thrown upwards as it flew in an arc. The second one, gently. He instantly picked up another dagger and stretched out his hand. He crouched even lower as he shot out the dagger. And so, that was how 5 daggers all flew at different speeds and angles towards their targets. Swoosh! Swoosh! Almost at the same time. The 5 harpies all died in an instant as their necks and heads were pierced. Wow! Behind him, Susie's small admiration flowed out. It was like watching the circus on a television or a movie. However, the quality of his actions was different from that of a Pierrot's. It was like watching a true master of daggers that exceeded those in the Chinese opera. Although she knew that she had to be quiet, the young Susie couldn't stop herself from making a remark. After recognizing her mistake, she quickly covered her mouth. Fortunately, it didn't seem like the harpies on the ceilings noticed her. Afterwards, Muyong stretched out his hand and used the art of death skill. A dark aura flowed out from his hands and headed towards the 5 dead harpies. Swish! The dead harpy awkwardly lifted its body. Soon after, all 5 harpies came back to life in an awkward posture. Maybe it was because he used his skill from afar, but the harpies didn't heal at all. However, they were still useful in creating a confusion. Go! Harpies were the type of monsters who lived in groups. They probably never had been attacked by their group members, especially those who were turned into undead. As expected, the harpy flock became confused when the 5 harpies attacked. Tens of them tangled together and the paralyzing poison permeated into their scars. Their weapons, which they had to protect themselves, became a weapon that would take their own lives. One after another, the number of harpies that dropped onto the floor increased. Like a shadow, Muyong secretly approached the paralyzed harpies, stopped their breathing and diligently moved his hands to use the art of death skill. I don't think I can make too much. Muyong lightly clicked his tongue. The art of death skill was currently a C rank skill. In the beginning, when it was an F rank, he barely had the strength to use it a few times. Now, after increasing the rank a few times, he was able to use the skill more freely than in the beginning, but 50 was the limit. Muyong just focused on making undead. If he did that, he was able to use the art of death skill double the times he normally could. Level 34. Type Undead. Strength 35. Agility 42. Stamina 28. Intelligence 5. Wisdom 5. At last, once he created a 100 undead, the above message appeared. The 100 harpies were recognized as if they were a single undead. I can make it into a talisman. Muyong stuffed in all the created undead into one talisman. He thought that just having a few would be useful, but this outcome was better than he had expected. And the newly created harpy undead were definitely worth the price. It was because the already dead harpies were no longer affected by paralyzing poison. It might be effective if it was a type of paralysis which affected the muscles, but the harpies' poison was a type that affected the brain and nerves. They only had a chance if they used their sharp claws to rip apart their opponent, but because of the great confusion that rose from their own peers attacking them, they weren't able to properly fight back. Muyong made the most of the commotion by taking out a couple of talismans. The Prince and the Avengers, Blazing Spear Soldier and Sorceress of Lighting. Soon, all the undead Muyong possessed were summoned. And as he turned his head, he saw Susie, who was looking towards him with a blank expression. I won't tell anyone. As if she regarded it as secret, she quietly repeated her words. There were rumors behind the scenes that Muyong worked with the dead, but this was the first time she had personally seen this. Especially Fire Dragon Wu and Code, didn't they slay people when they were judges? Their appearance and their mood were slightly different, but she didn't know why they suddenly appeared here. Susie couldn't think any further. Even if Susie was smart, she couldn't do anything about the limitations of her age. Only, they gave her goosebumps. I just need to earn the eye of the sky. Muyong didn't care. If he achieved his goal in the Sky Library, it didn't matter if his identity was exposed. Either way, he was planning on leaving the great city. It was necessary to leave the great city to continuously earn things like secret classes and to improve. What should I do? The Blazing Spear Soldier. A conversation was possible with the Fire Dragon Wu, who was turned into an undead when he was still alive. Hunt down every last living bird. I will follow your order. Growl. Blaze. Fire and lightning raged together. It could be said that Muyong cleverly avoided the limits of the Sky Library. Since all the undead Muyong had were extremely strong. The strength of many following a single order was amazing. It wasn't like there weren't people with summoner classes, but the majority earned these things known as classes as they lived their lives in the underworld. It was a special case for Muyong to earn a class so early. More so, because it was a lord class. As they finally killed all the harpies in the flock, something unexpected happened. Muyong's body gradually became transparent. Mr. As Suzy noticed the change, she tilted her head slightly as she called for him, but Muyong had already disappeared. Muyong realized that this forced send-off was for a reward. However, he was secretly quite surprised. The reason why the long-distance teleportation magical item was an amazing item was because it allowed the user to move to a place they remembered, but also because teleportation was a movement through space. Skills that allowed the user to move through space were rare and there were barely any items that could do this. However, it teleported Muyong for his reward. Soon, the surrounding background slowly changed. Muyong was on top of a place similar to a temple. The temple itself was totally murky and the whole area was only lit up a bit by a small fire hanging on top of the ceiling. And Muyong was able to find 8 huge statues surrounding the place. A man holding a dragon and a spear, a man in the form of a beast, a bird with golden wings and hair, even a goblin with 3 heads and many long arms. Demigods and semi-devils. Muyong was certain that the 8 statues had something to do with the demigods and semi-devils. Even the name of the room itself was the Room of 8 Ghosts. Zen. The infinity pouch emitted a light. As he placed his hand inside, his hand naturally took out a talisman. Talisman of Azura. The talisman he received after clearing the first boss in the Blue Temple. It was given to him when he left a phenomenal record. Muyong was planning on using the Talisman of Azura later on when he obtained the S-ranked weapon Diablos, as it allowed him to strengthen an equipment or a skill. However, right now, the Talisman of Azura shined as it flew out of his hand and was absorbed into the goblin with 6 hands. It was actually a statue modeled after Azura. Thump. Thump. Soon, Azura moved. Slowly, he stretched out his large hand and grabbed Muyong. Afterwards, Muyong locked eyes with one of the 3 heads. Muyong felt like his soul was being sucked in as he looked into his eyes. As the hand moved, he was able to see the rest of the eyes. He felt like he entered a place deep inside an abyss. Lightning raged inside Muyong's head as he looked at all 6 eyes the 3 heads had. He couldn't think about anything. Muyong was able to peek inside the world of horrifying demons and spirits in Azura's 6 eyes. The screams and anguish of 10 billion, 100 billion, ringed in Muyong's ears. A place where death was evident. A place that was death itself. Even Muyong, who killed thousands of people, couldn't understand everything in this world. No, it was impossible for a human to understand all 6 places. He just scooped up a very small part, a grain of something. Chapter 42, Azura, 6. TL, Yoni. Edited, Yoni, Mayanai. Sponsored, Anonymous. Muyong opened his eyes. Since he already had his eyes opened, it was misleading, but he had awakened to observe the 6 worlds of the devils. A message appeared 1 step behind. However, Muyong already knew. No, he realized. If he learned this skill, one of his chances of learning a skill from the Sky Library and the Talisman of Azura would be lost, but even if the cost was multiple times that, it would be insignificant in front of the 6 paths. He was captivated by 6 paths' unlimited potential. If he could just fully manipulate the 6 worlds, he could reign as the true king of the devils. He didn't know this when he earned the Death Lord class. While using the skill, he thought of its usefulness and his thoughts had become more positive towards it. However, the 6 paths was different. He couldn't waste this enlightenment. Like dust floating in the air, he was unsure when he would be enlightened or if it had come and left. However, Muyong was confident right now. He didn't know what this enlightenment really was, but he knew it was very beneficial and that he must grab hold of it. It was close to an instinctive desire for strength. I will learn it. Muyong looked straight into Azura's eyes. Azura. He was a figure who was recognized as the bad or the good god depending on the origin. There was a story that once a person collected the 8 Deva guardians of Buddhism, Buddha will descend. It was a classified information that only the 5 great clans knew about, and they believed that the descent of Buddha will be the only way to get rid of all the 72 demon gods and save the world. Was it joking with me? Muyong's eyebrows slightly went up. What do you want, Azura? Muyong tried to understand Azura's motives with his deep gaze. He didn't just give it to anyone. He meant that he would provide enlightenment if one fulfilled a specific condition. Azura's 6 eyes started to shine all at once. Kill Say-Cross vassal. Then I will prove how I'm superior. A voice ringed inside his ears. His massive existence also sounded out. Muyong smiled. Say-Kra was a god who protected the Buddha's teachings and also called the god of dance, Indra. Muyong didn't study a lot about Buddhism, but he knew that the word Azura Jangwon originated from the fight with Azura and Say-Kra. However, from what Muyong remembered, Azura had never won against Say-Kra. Did he want to win by even using a substitute to fight for him? Say-Kra was the owner of the Deva, the first character of 8 Deva guardians of Buddhism too. Also, they were both converted into gods under Buddha. 8 Deva guardians of Buddhism. There was a high chance that the vassal would have something similar to the talisman of Deva, as he was the first of the 8 Deva guardians of Buddhism. He thought it was going to be simple, but it wasn't a simple reward. It was one of the stories that were essential to the creation of this world. He could say that he was following the right path. Is there a way to know who Say-Kra's vassal is? Muyong spoke with a voice filled with curiosity. It seemed like Azura himself had descended onto his statue. And if he could figure out who Say-Kra's vassal was, it would allow him to be a step closer in collecting all 8 Deva guardians of Buddhism. He was able to get closer to the reason why the 5 great clans were so secretive about it. You will naturally know when you meet him. When you become my vassal, it is your destiny to bump into each other. I will prove that I'm most superior among the 8 Deva. He couldn't tell who the vassal was. But, from how Azura spoke, it seemed like the vassal was already in the underworld. The owner of the heavens. If it was someone Say-Kra had personally selected, that person wouldn't be ordinary. It had to be someone who was in or close to the top 10 humans, or one of the strong who wasn't known yet. Since the underworld was large, that there was still a possibility that there was someone strong who wasn't well known. As of now, Muyong couldn't do anything. Muyong's fighting strength was completely different than that of a beginner's, but there was still a large gap compared to the people who have established themselves in the underworld for 50 years. At most, 10 years of fighting experience. It was an extraordinary development because it had only been less than 2 months since he had returned, but this was only when he gave it his all, including all his undead. He did massacre the 5,000 harpies, but that was only because harpies weren't powerful monsters. And there was a significant amount that died in the confusion as they cut through each other's wings to kill each other. In short, they destroyed themselves. Either way, even if it was like this, Muyong alone fell short by 10 years. From the start, if a person survived 10 years of the underworld, it meant that the person had that much skill. Even if a person could live safely around the city, the variables of the underworld could not be ignored. Even if Muyong said at most they were not opponents to be taken lightly of. They could only adapt to all sorts of circumstances, unlike the rising stars who grew up protected. Since Muyong's irregular attacks didn't really work on them, it was hard to say anything above that. But, it was still okay. Azura never gave him a deadline. It meant that he just needed to complete the condition someday. Muyong slowly opened his mouth. I will kill Say-Kra's vassal for you. That was enough. He wanted to ask him in detail, but Azura's eyes slowly lost their light. He felt like he needed to reply before the light disappeared. He wasn't too sad. It was enough that he grabbed hold of a hint on collecting all the 8 Deva guardians of Buddhism. Whoosh! Right after Muyong replied, a strong gust of wind blew. Azura's hand was holding Muyong's body tightly. Hiya! Say all kinds of malice and screams stirred up his soul. Muyong's vision was blocked and his eyes turned black. An image intense as lightning. Inside that image, there was a world. Only crazy devils existed on Azura's path. The moment he glanced at, Myung lost conscious. Mister. Slap. Someone was violently slapping Myung's cheeks. Myung opened his eyes. He saw a lot of clocks and Susie's relieved face. Woo, I thought you were dead. Myung lifted his body. Where are we? It was different from what he saw after he completed the high-ranked room and was about to enter the room of 8 ghosts. This was a different place as no dead harpies were lying on the floor. As Myung asked, Susie thought for a moment and spoke. It said this was the top-ranked room. All of a sudden the room changed and it became like this. The room itself had changed? It seemed like the high-ranked room had moved to the top room right away. However, no trial was given. The surroundings were silent and Susie was already holding a book. Lineage of Light. Myung thought he heard it before. He couldn't remember the exact details but he thought he caught a glimpse of that name among the top-ranked skills. And before Myung knew, a book was placed on top of his body. Eye of the Sky. He didn't even choose it yet but how was it already found? He didn't even tell Susie. If Susie even found this with her senses weren't only good but she was born with mind-reading abilities. It was impossible unless she peeked in his heart. Did you bring it? Susie shook her head as Myung looked at her with doubtful eyes. It just appeared when we entered. And there is no way to move around in here. It kept saying how you can leave when you learn the skill. It meant that Susie just didn't learn her skill yet because she didn't want to leave this place without Myung. Maybe this was why information about the top-ranked room was limited. Information about the top-ranked room was one of the top secrets of every group. As Myung only learned information through other people's status viewers, he didn't have exact information. The histories only offered what they learned from the top-ranked room and no details about what was there and what devices were there were given. It seemed like it gave away what the person wanted the most or what it believed was best suited for the person. In fact, there were no books or bookshelves near them. All it had were all different kinds of clocks. This was why information about the top-ranked room was limited even if people wanted to know more about it. It was worth handling it as top secret. Myung held the book. Afterwards, as he slowly opened it, he felt like the book was being sucked into his body. With this, he learned 2 skills from the Sky Library. He turned his status viewer to check information about them. Skill title 6 Paths, the first path. Description: the enlightenment of the 6 worlds the spirits and the devils live in have been placed inside. When you overcome the first path, the world of awareness will increase and you will be able to step inside another world if you overcome the first path. When you capture spirits and devils into the world of awareness, the characteristics and power will change depending on their type. The descriptions of the 6 paths are written below. Azura Path: the world of crazy Azuras where they always fight. Hell Path, Preta Path, Animal Path, Human Path, Deva Path. Skill title Eye of the Sky, F. Description: an all-inclusive skill about the information inside the Sky Library. As you increase your rank, the amount you can see increases. The 6 paths and the Eye of the Sky. He was still unable to picture what kind of skill the 6 paths was at all. It seemed like he needed to reinforce the skills with, to know. On the other hand, Myung knew a lot about the skill, Eye of the Sky. You can read the skill or the equipment your opponent is using. The man with 108 eyes, Golem. He was the one with the most observation type skills. And out of the skills, Eye of the Sky was the most special skill. And as it had a broad spectrum of uses, he used it extensively. Myung found out about this skill through the assassination of Golem, but when he thought about the situation back then, he smirked. The process took a good 6 months. It because Golem avoided all the traps and stakeouts to protect himself. Myung remembered that he wasn't very powerful but he was very particular. Myung had to use his pure abilities to oppress him as he dodged most of the skills. An achievement effect has also been added. If his eyes weren't wrong, there was really another effect added. He checked it right away. Achievement effect. Grimoire's Anguish, A, +3 to all abilities. Soulmate, B+, from now on, if you commune with an undead, the undead stats will slightly increase permanently. Azura's Vassal, A, the strength to deal with spirits and devil's power, spirit ability increased by 10. Class effect. Death Lord, Lord class, ruler of death. Class effect none. Strength 80, 54 plus 26. Agility 71, 53 plus 18. Stamina 77, 49 plus 28. Intelligence 48, 30 plus 18. Wisdom 48, 30 plus 18. Fighting Aura 50, 32 plus 18. Magic Resistance 30, 12 plus 18. Spirit Ability 38, 10 plus 28. Special note, Fighting Aura has been awakened. Equipped and invoked equipment, Anguish, Strength plus 5, Herculean Strength Leather Armor, Strength plus 3, Lunatic Sovereign Set, all stats plus 15, Stamina plus 10. Spirit Ability. A distinct stat had been found. Looking at how it was classified as an A rank, the Spirit Ability seemed to be the main stat for the 6 Paths skill. Meanwhile, his stats had greatly improved, and as he gained what he wanted, he could say he was progressing smoothly. Mr. B, but your head. I think something has changed. Then, Susie moved a step back. Myung frowned. What did she mean by changed? If there was a change, then it could only be because of one reason. 6 paths. It could only the result of the enlightenment of the crazy worlds devils lived in. However, Myung couldn't tell what had changed. Since she specified it was his head, that meant that most of the changes happened on some part of his head. As he lifted up his hand to touch his head, he could feel something. As Myung completely wrinkled his face, he looked at himself using the back of his status viewer. This. Even Myung couldn't help but be a little surprised. His hair turned completely white. A horn was created. One Azurajang means chaos, mess, madhouse, turmoil in Korea. I'm not sure if it is true, but I think the author mentions it because it sounds like Azura. 2. The first character of 8 Deva Guardians of Buddhism, is which means Deva or heavenly. Chapter 43, Azura, End. TL, Yoni. Edited, Yoni, Mayanai. As if it was letting its presence known, it stood upright in the middle of his head. Although the size wasn't big, it seemed like it changed along with his hair color. Goblin King. As Myung looked at himself from the status viewer, a sudden thought came to him. Only the Goblin King could have this type of horn and white hair. For a moment, Myung was lost in his thoughts. Was it because he became Azura's vassal, which could be said as the peak of all devils? His current appearance was too eye-catching. If he went out like this, it would attract attention. A few groups would try to figure out what skills he learned in the Sky Library, and there was a highly likely chance that a problem would occur in the process. But, no matter how hard he pressed on his horn, it wouldn't go in. I might figure something out if I use Azura Path. The 6 paths was the reason for this change. As of now, Myung could only use Azura Path. He could only move to the world of crazy spirits and devils. However, it didn't seem like it was possible to use it now. I need a catalyst. He instinctively knew that a spirit or a devil was needed. And Myung knew a place which had one of the two. The low-ranked room and the mid-ranked room. The shadows in that place were considered as spirits. Mr. It is you, right? Before he knew it, Susie cautiously asked after learning Lineage of Light. Looking at Susie's cautiousness, Myung coldly answered. From now, go out alone. Me, alone? Myung gazed into Susie's eyes. First, he was planning to do whatever he could in the 3-day time frame he was given. So, it wasn't good for Suzy to be with him. As the skill was out of the ordinary, Myung was unsure if he would be able to control its destructive nature like the Avengers and would destroy everything around him. And most importantly, Myung had already achieved all his goals in the great city. Instead of going out and making people suspicious, it might be better to have them think he was dead and use the long-distance teleportation magical item. Since the investigation about Fire Dragon Wu was going to end soon, there was a high chance that it would waste his time. There was a chance he would get chased by large groups one after another if he didn't straighten things out, including his appearance. Mr. You're not going anywhere, right? Suzy couldn't hide the anxiety in her voice as she spoke, but Myung pointed his finger towards a place. If you go towards the middle of the clock tower, you will be summoned out of the Sky Library. Wait for me outside. A perfect clock tower stood surrounded by other clocks. That was the exit. The door that was only set up in the top-ranked room. Must I really go? Go. Suzy's eyes were filled with tears as Myung heartlessly cast her away. I'm sorry I was surprised earlier. I won't bother you and just have my mouth shut. I will walk stealthily like a cat too. Myung frowned. It seemed like Suzy realized that Myung was planning on leaving her. However, Suzy's reaction was a bit unexpected. The time they had spent together was only a bit more than a month. And it wasn't like Myung was good to her. Myung only gave back what he received. Like compensating for the amount of work. He didn't show any favoritism or affection. He didn't even know how to give those. He never expected that what he gave would give him trust and affection in return. At least for Myung, those two words were very unfamiliar to him. From now on, I won't cry and work harder. I will work harder so. Suzy bit her lips. She thought that with Myung's personality, he wouldn't like to see her cry. And this was a reasonable reaction in her position. The only person who accepted her father and herself. He was the first person to acknowledge her when everyone else avoided them, thinking they would only be a bother. Myung was the one who appeared like a hero in most perilous situations. Myung was an existence greater than a savior, a rock, an idol, and hero to Suzy. There was a time when she thought he might have been a god. He knew everything. He had the answers to everything. And all those things saved Suzy's life. He was close a guardian. She was unable to suppress her feelings of sadness when she felt like her guardian was leaving her. Myung gave her a talisman. Take this. This. It's the talisman of Emperor of the Shrew Mice. The Emperor of the Shrew Mice, King. It did help in its own way, but after learning the skills here, there wasn't much use for it anymore. He could do most things that King could with an undead. It was a thing that he didn't want, even though it wasn't as useful. Suzy wiped her tears and looked at Myung. You must return this to me. Since I treasure this a lot. Wait for me outside. After receiving the talisman, Suzy looked back and forth at Myung and the talisman before she firmly nodded as if she had resolved herself. Eventually, she started to move her legs and walk towards the clock tower. While she walked, she didn't forget to constantly turn around to look back at Myung. If you don't come, I will throw it away. She firmly spoke before she passed through the door. The surrounding instantly became completely quiet. Consideration. Myung chuckled as he thought of that word. Although he believed that all his emotions had died off after living as a puppet for 40 years, it seemed like that wasn't so. As if parts of his nature that were sealed for 40 years were starting to pop out little by little. Maybe he was a person with a bit of consideration for others before he was kidnapped by the forest of death. What he did for a living and with what kind of mindset he had lived his day-to-day life. He was curious, but that was all. No matter how hard he tried, nothing came to his mind. It was like a wind he could never grasp. Myung then shook his head. Potential to become a hero. Like Taewon, Suzy also had the potential to become a hero. However, as she was still too young he didn't have high hopes for her. It was easy for someone so young to change. Her consciousness wouldn't have been fully developed yet. Therefore, it was hard to figure her out with just 1 or 2 months. There was a high chance that she could turn out to be a completely different person as she gotten older. It was because unlike T1 who could think and walk his own path as an adult, Susie was at an age where she was weak to surrounding temptations. Anyone will be tempted. A top-ranked skill in a secret class. Especially, the Valkyrie of Dawn melted the surrounding people's hearts. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't stop it. It was like an all in his pocket. If he wasn't going to stay beside her and protect her forever, it was right to just leave her. Since he was busy to move on his own, he didn't have time to take care of her. But, for that slight chance that it could happen, he decided to invest. It really wasn't much of an investment, but we all need to walk our own path. Even if she would walk a different path than Weung, he could only hope that she wouldn't walk the path the established people in the underworld did. If they steadily walk their own path, they would meet someday. He shook his head and cleared his thoughts. Let's go. It was time to make his last inspection. The shadow spirits in the mid-ranked room quickly approached Weung as they discovered him. As he looked at the shadow spirits, his eyes turned white and they unexpectedly became ghastly. Come. Weung already knew how to handle spirits and devils. He didn't avoid the spirit that was approaching him and grabbed hold of it with his hand. Surprisingly, the shadow spirit trembled when it was grabbed by Weung. Slurp. As he placed it inside his mouth, the spirit got sucked in. Gah! The spirit inside his body started to go berserk. Weung's body was connected to one of the 6 worlds, Azura Path. It was a world that would make a weak spirit instantly go crazy. Azura Path didn't completely become mine. I need to increase the number of spirits and devils little by little to rule over them. As the spirit went crazy, Weung could slowly confirm the specifics of Azura Path. There were already a lot of spirits and devils in Azura Path, but they did not listen to his command. He felt their wills were not willing to listen to a weak Azura's words. The only way to rule over them was to increase Weung's own formless monsters and prove his power. And other paths would be available once he conquered the Azura Path. Weung continued to absorb all the spirits until he met a steel doll. I can see it. He could clearly see the spirit controlling the steel doll. It was a spirit a class higher than the shadow spirits. However, the steel dolls didn't attack an enemy that was alone. That condition was a chance for Weung. It was similar to finding gold while walking down the street. Weung didn't hesitate and stretched out his hand to absorb even the spirit of the steel doll. Crack! Crack! At the same time, the steel doll cracked and broke apart as it collapsed. Find them! Following Weung's order, the spirits that he had already eaten until now popped out. They didn't have any siblings. Instantly, they spread out to search for the rest of the spirits. The Death Lord allowed him to handle dead bodies. He wasn't able to handle monsters that were spirit types. And so, Weung was able to make all the spirits in the mid-ranked room his in less than 2 hours. All he did was absorb all the spirits, but it was acknowledged as his win. Then, a black armor made from an unknown material appeared. It felt more like a leather clothing than an armor, but to know what it really was, Weung's eyes focused onto his status viewer. Name, Shadow Armor. Rank, B+. Classification, A keepable type. Durability, 12,358. Effect, it allows you to teleport to a shadow within your vision 3 times a day. The armor Weung was wearing right now was the Herculean strength leather armor. He was using it because it increased his strength by 3 and had decent durability, but it was low rank. When he wasn't able to find something to replace it, a much better equipment appeared. Shadow teleportation. He basically gained 3 chances a day to sneak up on an opponent and cut their necks off. This is good. It was an equipment every assassin dreamed of. Not only that, but it seemed like he could use it well in dangerous situations. The slightly low durability was a flaw, but it wasn't bad at all. Without any delay, Muyoung took off his Herculean strength leather armor and put on the shadow armor. Afterwards, as he was about to move to the low-ranked room, he was able to detect people moving from afar. In the middle was Horus. As his path was once blocked by the steel dolls, he seemed to have gathered more people from the low-ranked room. Horus stood in his spot for a while as he looked at Muyoung. "You." Then a smile appeared slowly on Horus's lips. "Ha! I wasn't able to recognize you for a while as your appearance had changed. It seems like you have learned a high-ranked skill." Horus was certain that the change in Muyoung's appearance was due to a skill he learned in the high-ranked room. It was because he felt a certain ghastliness emitting from Muyoung. Just thinking about how good a top-ranked skill would make him feel good. However, Horus didn't know that Muyoung had already gone to the top-ranked room and was on his way down. And the fact that Suzy already took the Lineage of Light skill. Horus's lips wiggled unpleasantly. "Good that we ran into you. You dare to steer all the steel dolls and try to kill me." Horus's eyes flared up. He made a resolution that he will kill Muyoung when he saw him again, and that chance came quickly. Blaze. Blazing wings appeared from Horus's back. He took out a sword made of light. He was truly a soldier of the Sunday. In reality, Horus had the most outstanding abilities among the numerous rising stars of the Sun Guild. He was young, but it wasn't weird to call him a soldier. Confident he was surely going to win. That smirk that looked down on Muyoung. Horus continued to mock him. "Never ever will you die in peace. You bastard." Horus started to move. No, when Muyoung noticed Horus had moved, he was already right in front of him. "Got you." Even if the user had learned a high-ranked skill, the user was unable to use it properly if he lacked the ability. It would be boring to finish him with one swift strike, but it couldn't be helped by the overwhelming difference in skills. And when Horus was certain of his win, Horus's blade slightly changed its course, accompanied by an unrecognizable sound. Muyoung just stood still, but the sword only brushed past him. Hey! He couldn't hit a target right in front of him? That wasn't possible. A sound escaped his mouth as he was taken back. As he turned his doubtful eyes, a small smile appeared on Muyoung's lips. "It looks like I can use it this way as well." Chapter 44, Demon God's Territory, 1. TL, Mayanai. Edited, Mayanai, Yoni. Sponsored, Sudarshan. A mental attack using spirits. Shadow spirits could control their victims. Like that, it was possible to use the spirits to limit the movements of his opponents. However, mental attacks wouldn't have much of an effect on those with high intelligence. Since intelligence was related to one's immunity to these attacks, it showed that Horus's intelligence wasn't very high. But he wasn't able to completely control him. Changing the course of his sword was the best he could do. The helmets the members of the Sun Guild wear have a mental defense attribute. Muyoung attempted to control Horus's body. If Horus wasn't wearing the sun helmet and Muyoung was better at controlling spirits, he would have been successful. He didn't need to control him for long either. Muyoung could kill his opponent in a second. "I don't know what skill you're using, but it's nothing more than a party trick." As Horus ground his teeth, his sun helmet started to emit a light. Two phrases appeared in front of Muyoung's eyes. The Eye of the Sky automatically activated to reveal the changes going on in Horus. 5 minutes of increased immunity. It meant that mental attacks using the spirits would no longer be effective. Not every sun helmet had the same effect. If he was completely immune for 5 minutes, that helmet would be top-ranked among them. Soon after, Horus manipulated space as he rushed towards Muyoung. So he knows how to use the blink skill. Clash! He raised Anguish and narrowly blocked Horus's sword. Blink was a skill that could be used to teleport short distances. The maximum distance was 2 m and it used a lot of magical power, so not many people stubbornly increased its rank. However, Horus was able to use blink freely. He had an immense amount of magical power and a high degree of skill. Swish! Dash! Horus's attacks were abnormally quick. A second's hesitation would mean his death. Even Weong couldn't help but be completely tense. Horus could increase the length of his sword of light and could even throw it. However, this also would consume an incredible amount of magical power. For a kid that only looked to be 15 or 16 to have that much magical power and skill. They aren't called rising stars for nothing. Did the Sun Guild have a rising star like that? He seemed to be 2 levels above a fire dragon Wu and Code, both whom he had faced before. For someone to be this much above his peers, it meant that he had the talent, effort, and support to back it up. It was unexpected for his intelligence to be low compared to that, but he couldn't say that he didn't have great skill. However, even though he was clearly winning, Horus felt something was strange and knit his brows. Horus's continuous attacks stopped. Aren't you a beginner? How can a beginner be my match? Horus was a second generation. He only knew that beginners would spend a month in the temple before coming to the underworld. But it was impossible for them to increase their strength to the point of being able to defeat him in that short period of time. Weong didn't reply. Instead, he became more alert. At most, 2 m. The range Horus could blink to. Weong was currently within it. His neck could fly off at any moment. Horus unconcernedly spoke in a composed voice. Looks like you were strong on that place called Earth. Good. The skilled deserve to be treated as such. I will now fight you as a warrior. He raised his sword and pierced the floor. My name is Horus, the son of the great warrior Almighty and the incarnation of the Sun God. He was named after the Sun God from ancient Egypt. For the Sun Guild to allow that name meant he came from a noble descent. The great warrior Almighty. He was the second most important figure in the Sun Guild. He placed among the top 10 humans in the past and was pushed out due to his age. But he wasn't an opponent you could disregard because of that. There was no one with more experience than him. So he's Almighty's child. He had heard of Horus's name. He had even seen him before, but Horus was too different from his current self that he couldn't recognize him. In the past, Horus was a degenerate. A degenerate without an arm who was addicted to alcohol, drugs, and women. He did remember hearing that he used to be incredibly strong even among the rising stars when he was young. I heard he became like that after failing to become the guild master. Alexandro Quintart's prolonged rule. A monarchy was established because of that. The Sun Guild was Alexandro Quintart's castle. He heard that Horus was unable to wait any longer and had lost his arm after challenging Alexandro Quintart. If he wasn't Almighty's son, he would have died that day. Afterwards, he became a degenerate. But he wasn't a degenerate right now. Horus, who was currently normal, stared at Weong as if urging him. Weong? Weong? What an unusual name. Then, let's start. Horus was a true warrior. Even though he looked at Weong with a death stare, he felt excited after acknowledging Weong's strength. It meant that a fight between the strong brought him that much pleasure. I guess this is much is enough for a teaser. However, Weong never thought of having a pure one-on-one fight. Objectively, he was no match against him in a one-on-one fight. Horus's abilities weren't something Weong could currently deal with. Horus was strong enough to place first or second amongst the rising stars. Stubbornly fighting one-on-one was suicide. Slash! Horus's sword sliced through the air once again. However, Horus was able to find Weong's presence as he turned his body. Shadow teleportation. The effect of the shadow armor. Although it could only be used 3 times a day, it was enough to distract Horus for a moment. Weong was holding talismans in his hands before anyone realized. The blazing spear soldier, sorceress of lightning, and the prince and the avengers. He brought them all out. In an instant, more than 30 undead were spread around Weong. You were a corpse sorcerer. Looking at the scene, Horus deeply frowned. His eye reflected feelings of hatred. He believed that true warriors shouldn't manipulate dead people. However, Muyeong didn't care. The undead were a part of his strength. See, could that? A total of 60 people were spectating Muyeong and Horus's fight. They were originally people Horus had dragged here to complete the mid-ranked room. But one of them let out a shock after seeing Muyeong's summoned undead. The slayer of the two, tower. How? Flop. A man collapsed. His body was trembling non-stop and due to the extreme fear, he pissed himself. It seemed he was one of the few who had killed 5 and escaped. Although there wasn't anyone who had seen Muyeong personally, there were a few that had seen the zombies and the skeleton of fire and ice. And the prince and the Avengers were ghoul-type undead. Their size was different but they looked similar. The man's eyes were locked onto the prince and the Avengers as he trembled. There were tens of people who feared death and had killed their comrades to escape the tower. For a person from then to be here. The slayer of the tower? Him. That rumor was true. A small commotion. People chattered. If they exited the Sky Library, information about Muyeong would spread. I never intended to spare you in the first place. Kill them. It was one of the reasons why he made Suzy leave first. Blaze. The blazing spear soldier was the first to move. The long spear was engulfed in flames as he blocked his surroundings. Crackle. As people hesitated, the sorceress of lightning shot lightning bolts down from above. Save me. Please. Please. Ah. The Avengers cleared out the rest. It was a massacre. Muyeong reanimated the corpses and embedded spirits in them. Among them, exactly 5 went through a change. The spirits who controlled the steel dolls. As soon as the 5 spirits attached themselves on the newly created zombies, their skin turned into steel. It became a living armor. They truly became steel zombies. Their stats had greatly increased and they had destructive power similar to the Avengers. I guess I can connect them together. He had gained another method for using spirits. In a few minutes, roughly 60 people had all died. They became undead and stood as Muyeong's soldiers. Horus, who was silently observing the scene, said in shock. I have never seen a corpse sorcerer like you. Just who are you? Necromancer was a secret class. As it had never appeared yet, it was obvious that Horus didn't know. Corpse sorcerer was a title given to those that controlled corpses like Jiangshi I. But the amount they could control were small and the process was complicated. They were unable to reanimate corpses with a skill like Muyeong. On top of that, those two seem familiar. I think it was called the Next Index? I think I saw them there. Don't tell me you killed them as well. The Next Index were a group of young big shots. He thought he saw them when he attended their group. Muyeong stretched his hand out. Soon, around 100 undead charged at Horus. Are you not going to answer? Fine. I will ask again when you are half dead. Horus was confident. A confidence that showed that he would not lose to an unknown man and some corpses. Although he did have the power, Muyeong's undead all possessed a strength that exceeded what they had when they were alive. The sorceress of lightning implanted the lightning rune on the surrounding zombies and steel zombies to strengthen them. Explode. Boom. The bodies of the strengthened zombies inflated. They drooled and their eyes turned red. It was a skill where the body would explode into powder along with the destruction of the enemy. Horus, who looked down on the dead, instantly became stunned. Clang. Even the blazing spear soldier was unable to receive Horus's sword. Although Horus was very strong in one-on-one fights, he wasn't used to fighting many at once. The exploding zombies blocked every direction and the blazing spear soldier wielded his spear in front of him. If he was careless, an Avenger would ride the explosion of the zombie and aim for his neck from above. The sun helmet shined as if it was about to explode. However, his sword was slowly losing its light. No matter how much magical power you had, there was a limit. Swish! Muyeong unsheathed anguish. And he slowly approached him. This doesn't make sense. For these dead corpses too. This isn't a fight between warriors. That's right. It's a fight of life or death. Ugh. Muyeong wielded his sword as he appeared behind Horus using shadow teleportation. Horus was barely able to block it, but he continued to be stunned. Muyeong slightly smiled. A fight between warriors? He had never done that before. Muyeong always stood on the borders of life or death. To Muyeong, living and killing your opponent first was the meaning of a fight. Coward! Fight me fair and square. Horus's sword trembled. He was even panting roughly. Muyeong used his last shadow teleportation to once again appear behind Horus. Fair and square. You couldn't live long if you thought of those things. To fight a monster, you had to become more monstrous. Clink clang. The sword of light shattered. The wings on Horus's back disappeared. Muyeong expressionlessly gazed at Horus, who fell to the floor. Then he took off Horus's status viewer from his wrist and read his history. Horus was a typical warrior. The top among undead warriors was the Death Knight. Horus was outstanding compared to the materials he had until now, but it was too lacking to create a Death Knight. However, he could probably become a Death Warrior that was ranked just below it. Art of Death. He imagined the shape it would take and cast the skill. Soon, a black aura flowed out and covered Horus's body. Level, 100. Type, Death Warrior. Strength 130, 117 plus 13. Agility 105, 92 plus 13. Stamina 113, 100 plus 13. Intelligence 58, 45 plus 13. Wisdom 67, 54 plus 13. Magical power, 120, 107 plus 13. Magic resistance 50, 37 plus 13. Plus excellent equip status, all stats plus 13. Plus can neutralize mental attacks. Plus blink, sword of the black sun, the wail of the warrior, wings of solar prominence are usable. Plus strong resistance against dark and light. Plus high defense. A calm smile appeared on Muyeong's lips. Horus was wearing a full black body armor and his eyes exuded the composure of the strong. He was stronger than any undead he had made until now. There was nothing he could ask for since he also had magic resistance. What was more, the art score of 83 was the highest he had gotten until now. There weren't even glaring flaws. He nodded his head in satisfaction and turned him into a talisman before putting him in. Afterwards, he took out another talisman. Long-distance teleportation magical item. A magical item that would teleport him to a place he remembered. I will capture Headley's cow from the demon god's territory. He was going to capture Headley's cow when it transforms into a phoenix. It was time to carry out his plan. He had obtained everything he needed here. He even unintentionally obtained a treasure like the Black Sun Warrior. Ryeb. Muyeong ripped up the magical item without reserve. Whoosh! Then Muyeong's figure disappeared along with a gust of wind. One Jiangshi is a Chinese hopping vampire, ghost, or zombie. Chapter 45, Demon God's Territory, 2. TL, Yoni. Edited, Yoni, Mayanai. Sponsored, Kenny K. Thud. With a loud sound, the doors of the Sky Library opened. However, no one came out. No, technically there was a girl who came out after 2 days. B. Susie. A small girl who seemed to be only about 10 years old. And if she came out of the Sky Library before the designated 3 days had ended, that only meant one thing. She earned a top-ranked skill. The top-ranked skills from the Sky Library were all extraordinary. As long as you got one, it allowed you to be above average. Also, she appeared to have broken the record for the youngest contestant so far. The news spread like a wildfire. In a blink of an eye, people started to crowd the entrance of the Sky Library. If it was an average record, it wouldn't have been such a big impact. But, it wasn't an average record. It was a situation where people believed Susie's class was also at least above a rare rank. Jackpot! The giants who learned of this all thought the same. It had been a very long time since they had a big-shot beginner like her. Due to this, she was stuck in front of the Sky Library against her will. How did you earn a top-ranked skill? Won't you tell me what kind of skill you learned from there? Did you get easier trials? What kind of trials did you face? Questions flooded in. The large groups were unable to act recklessly as she was getting too much attention. They could have used force if only Susie was older or wasn't a big deal. From the start, not many kids passed through the gate. If there was any, less than 5 in a year. The people who settled in the underworld were bound to be a bit sympathetic towards kids who passed through the gate. Since they were kids who came from Earth and not a second generation. Therefore, it would ruin the reputations of large groups if they used force to keep a kid under their control and used her infinite potential for their own. The reason why giant guilds were able to keep their place for tens of years might have been due to their influence, but more so because of their honor and their cause. It was most important for members of large groups to have a sense of pride in their group. Therefore, they used dirty organizations like the Forest of Death to do their dirty work and for it to be completed without any rumors. It was a lot more complicated for them to touch her. And Weung only told Susie to leave as he was certain that Susie's life would be safe, as the established groups were cowards who had a lot to keep. Anyhow, if anyone was to take Susie in, they would become a hot topic for a while. It was highly likely that she would be able to energize the lifeless city as well as develop into a strong character. The strength of a group relied on how many strong individuals they had. It was better to have one strong person than 100 nobodies. Especially, the fighting strength of those who were known as transcendent beings were beyond one's imagination. Normally, a person would be considered a transcendent being if all the person's important stats were above 500. However, it was impossible for a normal person to achieve this, as there would be a wall at every interval of 100. A transcendent being could do the work of 10 strong individuals. If they searched everyone in the underworld, there may be about 50 transcendent beings in total. She has the foundation to become a transcendent being. Susie had the potential to become a transcendent being. As the number of transcendent beings increased, they would gain a strength that no one could disregard, so the large groups couldn't help but covet her. However, it was too late to do anything as she was already the center of attention. They might have been able to do something if Susie only had a top-ranked skill or a class ranked higher than a unique class, but she had both. It was a problem because she had both. More so, many people believed that first generations developed faster than second generations. Who would give up a person who had the potential to become a transcendent being? First, let's wait and see if anyone else will come out of the Sky Library. The representatives of each group made an agreement. However, no matter how long they waited, no one came out. Did they all die? It looks like everyone's dead since no one has come out after all this time. An unprecedented situation. There had never been a case like this in the past 10 years. What exactly happened inside? I don't know. Susie just shook her head. Her face turned pale as if she really didn't know anything. It was because Susie heard people chat about how everyone might have died. That can't be true. A guardian angel couldn't die. If he did, that meant he wasn't an angel. She secretly thought he would always stay nearby, watch out for her and protect her. Mr. Susie touched the one talisman she received. A teardrop fell to the floor. Susie. She's my child. Please move aside. Susie's father and Tiwan, who received the news late, came to see her but were unable to get close. There were a lot of people and it wasn't a situation where a beginner could push their way through. In the center of where people were gathered, the giant groups were having a heated discussion about Susie. The head of Imperial Clan really wants to meet that child. You think only your head will want to? That girl needs to be in our heavenly maid clan. Can the other places even raise her properly? With what capability would heavenly maid clan have if they aren't even part of the 5 great clans? Know your place before cutting in. Their voices became louder. Although none of the leaders appeared, the people with high standing in each group were present. No one was willing to yield. Then, the tall man wearing a sun helmet opened his mouth. Honestly, I don't think it's a matter we can decide on our own. It's a waste of time to continue to this pointless discussion. Instead, why don't we let the girl choose? Certainly, that seems to be the best solution. I will give you wealth and fame. They don't know a woman's delicacy. With your skills, you will definitely be the next candidate for the guild master. Depending on how much you try, you can live better than any king. Another competition had started. Susie was confused. She couldn't understand what was going on. They tried to persuade her with different kinds of words, but no place spoke of what she really wanted the most. Where are you, mister? Susie flopped down onto the floor. She closed her eyes and ears. At that moment, someone roared. What are you guys doing against one girl? Roar. Space shook. Only then were they able to see the muscular, mysterious man who screamed. The eyes of the people who knew of this mysterious man widened. Why, you! Fighting King Lucien! How are you here? Fighting King Lucien! The closest man to the top 10 individuals of humanity. Only looking at fighting strength, he didn't lose out to any for the current top 10. He chuckled. I'm the king. Who dares stop the path of a king? That was right. He wasn't called the Fighting King simply because he was good at fighting. Like a king, his words contained power. Even if he was banned from all the cities, because he was a king, he was able to go wherever he wanted. I've spent days and sleepless nights because I thought someone interesting had shown up. But you guys still running around and doing such shameless things. Tisk, tisk. Lucien clicked his tongue. Someone from the temple had broken his record. He had come because he was curious what the person looked like, but there was only a commotion. Then, the man with the sun helmet approached him and slightly bowed his head. Fighting King, this is the great city. Even if the strength of the Fighting King has reached the sky, you cannot start a commotion here. Commotion. Lucien laughed as he found it ridiculous. And spoke. If you really don't want me to start a commotion, fuck off. Nash. The man with the sun helmet ground his teeth. It was a king's power that the Fighting King had. The thing people called the words of a king and the words of an emperor. After, a surprising event occurred. The man started to move away from Lucien. I feel like getting rid of all of you, but since it gets annoying when people with big asses show up, I'm going to stop here. I won't do such things to a child no matter how crazy I am. In other words, he meant that they were crazier than him. Then, Lucien approached Susie. And just held her wrist. Indeed, you really are worth coveting. Lucien nodded as if he seemed interested after learning about her physique in an instant. As he was an initiate who learned traditional ancient martial arts, he had the ability to know a person's potential just by feeling the person's pulse. The skill Susie had was top class. It wasn't just the skill or class, her physique was outstanding. Child, can you stand up? Who are you, Grandpa? Susie opened her eyes and looked at Lucien, and she asked after noticing the unexpected change. I am a person known by others as the Fighting King. Anyways, weren't you scared? I wasn't scared at all. Mr. will scold them all. Mister? Who's that? That's... Susie tightly clenched her lips. And shook her head. Lucien was surprised by this. She defied my words. His words always contained power. Even if it wasn't intentional, it would naturally be expressed. But, young Susie defied him. Lucien stretched his hand and placed it on top of Susie's forehand for a moment. I have no intentions of hurting you. But, I'm a bit curious. Could you tell me who this mister is you're referring to? No. It was almost a reflexive reaction. Lucien knew of the reason for this type of reaction. Someone has implanted a safeguard. And the only people who could implant this kind of subconscious safeguard was himself and one other person. The King of Shadows. Lucien trembled for a moment in excitement. Finally, I found a clue. Lucien had been looking for a certain man regarding something for quite some time. No one knew of his existence, only Lucien knew. The bastard who ran the huge assassin organization called the Forest of Death and deceived others in the shadows. He's been following him for more than 40 years and still wasn't able to find a single clue. But, a clue had appeared in an unusual place. Of course, the defense mechanism was a bit lacking compared to him, but it seemed certain that this mister was related to him in some way. He couldn't let this opportunity pass by. This place isn't good. He needed time to break through the defense mechanism to find out the truth. Lucien made his decision before he spoke. I will take you to a safe place. How does that sound? If it's necessary, I will even teach you the skills necessary to survive. At least, it would be better than this place. My dad, we need to take my dad. Susie's instinct was crying out loud that she had to follow him to live. But, Lucien shook his head. Just you. I can't be certain if we will survive if it's more than 2 people. If those old monsters got off their asses, one of the 2 will definitely die. Then, I don't want to go. You don't want to go? You can't. Going with me is safer than this place. Lucien persisted. It was unlike for the Fighting King to act this way, but Lucien wasn't normal in the first place. He really wanted the clue, and even he couldn't help but covet over Susie's potential. People who were watching his actions started to raise their weapons. Fighting King. Are you really planning on becoming our enemy? Don't think you can just walk away after starting a commotion like this. The Fighting King frowned. Move aside, weaklings. Crack. The ground beneath him cracked every step he took. The ground shook and even the air pressure had changed. The people who weren't prepared fell to their knees. Child, don't worry. If he is alive, I will make sure you meet him again. I never go back on my word. Lucien had always done things his way. It wasn't different this time. As he gently pressed his hand on Susie's forehead, Susie fainted and closed her eyes. After placing Susie on his shoulder, he stomped on the ground. He started to quickly leave the great city after he jumped high in the air. Susie. Susie's father, who was looking at the whole situation from afar, lifted his head, but the 2 had already disappeared. It was a daylight kidnapping. The hell horse got mad. Muyong didn't seem like he would ever use a favor. But, it never expected Muyong to vanish like that. It would be its greatest disgrace if Muyong died in a random place. Even if he didn't like Muyong, it had to finish its contract. Nay! He cried out loud. Bang! Closh! Numerous lightning bolts fell down all around the hell horse. He was still able to know the location of Muyong as they were connected through a contract. Though it was a place very far from here. The hell horse resolved itself to fly as fast as it could through the air to reach Muyong before he got into trouble. Muyong opened his eyes. As he looked around, it really was the place he remembered. Black sky, black clouds, black sun, and a dead wasteland. Huge black mountains were erected all around him. The demon god's territory. A location barely touched by a human. The location where people would only find and start exploring in about 5 years. Muyong quietly nodded. I have arrived faster than I've expected. Chapter 46. He looked around. In this wasteland, there was a material he had to take before anyone else. Headley's cow. A unique fairy that could transform into any shape and could possess all the stats its target had. When Headley's cow's life was at risk, it would transform into a phoenix and escape. The phoenix was a mirage-rank monster. It was extremely rare and just as strong. However, the phoenix Headley's cow transforms into was something Weung could definitely catch. It would be the best material if only he could get it. First, I need to figure out where exactly it is. He was certain that Headley's cow would be here in 5 years but was unsure if it was here now. So he had to first survey his surroundings and figure out who the ruler of this area was. As it was a demon god's territory, if he accidentally met a strong monster, he could lose his life. Currently, Weung's strength was only considered average. Crows the size of a man's chest were flying around the mountains. Blood. He also smelled a thick scent of blood. Weung slowly moved towards the place reeking of blood. An incomparably large black dinosaur-like monster let out a cry. In front of it were giants covered in flames which grabbed the dinosaur's neck and were toying with it as they burned its whole body. The black dinosaur was a high-ranked monster known as the Aquitora. It had a fierce and aggressive temper and a tendency to hunt for fun, so it was the culprit in destroying the surrounding ecosystem. The Aquitora was a creature at the top of the food chain, but it was currently the one being hunted. It couldn't even fight back. It had no choice. The giants covered in flames were the bane of living creatures. Fire Tar. A giant of flames. With a height of 10 m, they were the top among the high-ranked monsters. Although there weren't many, they were a warrior tribe that lived in harsh conditions with a lifespan of 1,000 years. The 5 fire tars who were toying with the Aquitora broke its neck and made their hands sharp as knives to skin the beast. They then roasted the meat and ate it. The flames of the fire tar would only burn their enemies. Is this the territory of the fire tars? Weung, who gazed at this scene from afar, couldn't help but become nervous. If this was the fire tars' territory, then it would become a huge restriction on his movements. First, unlike their size, the fire tar were agile and sensitive. It was difficult for Weung to escape at his current level. Even with the help of the Hell Horse, there was a limit. What to do? He couldn't beat the fire tars right now. Even with the help of all his undead. From the start, the undead were weak against fire. An ant's hiding here. Thuud. One of the 5 fire tars moved. Weung's face distorted. He tried his best to hide but was unable to fool the fire tar's senses. Different from humans, they were able to use the surrounding temperature to detect living creatures. If this wasn't the fire tar's territory, he would have been able to walk away leisurely without getting caught. If I use the undead to buy some time, I can leave. Weung became tense as he took the lead. Just when Weung held talismans and was about to use them, the fire tar who had seen Weung tilted his head. A goblin? What, did you lose your pack? Goblin? Aha! Weung nodded his head. 6 paths. That was right. Didn't Weung's appearance change to that of a goblin king after being enlightened by the 6 paths? It wasn't weird for the fire tar to make a mistake. When Weung didn't reply, the fire tar pointed towards a direction and spoke. Your pack moved towards the west. To hold a ceremony for the advent of or something. If you go now, you should be able to catch up. He didn't sense any ill will from the fire tar. It felt like he was giving directions not to an enemy or a friend but to a passing civilian. It seemed like the relationship between the fire tars and the goblins weren't bad. The advent of He had never heard of that name before. Of course, there wasn't a lot of information about the life of goblins, but it did seem likely that they would have a few strange ceremonies. Anyways, he knew the fire tars weren't hostile. I have to use this chance. Weung calmed his heartbeat as much as he could. Since the fire tar might find something weird if his body temperature rose due to anxiety. 3 belts made from tree trunks wrapped around his waist. There were ranks among the fire tar, and a unique trait was that their ranks would be indicated by the amount of tree trunk belts around their waists. And if one had 3 belts, it meant he had the second highest rank. Vice Chieftain of the Fire Tars. Do you know of Headley's cow? The language was automatically interpreted by the status viewer. The accent was different, but the fire tar replied without being suspicious. It was because the fire tar believed that he could only be a goblin since he had recognized that he was the vice chieftain. Headley's cow? I haven't heard of it. Have you guys heard of it? The other 4 fire tars shook their heads. He had only asked just in case, but it was like he thought. They say they haven't either. Then, could I receive some meat from you? The fire tar vice chieftain thought over the sudden request and nodded his head. It's not like the amount a small goblin eats would leave a mark, so do what you want. Aquitora, the dinosaur-shaped monster, was huge. Even then, it was only enough to fill the 5 fire tars' bellies. Myung walked in an honorable manner and sliced off a hunk of Aquitora meat. Then he ate as gluttonously as he could. The fire tar's territory is vast. If I can't leave it, then I have to blend in. There was no guarantee that there was only one fire tar tribe. There could be others that were more hostile to others, so it's difficult to expect the rest to treat a goblin with goodwill. And eating together gave a sense of attachment to a group. In this moment, Myung was acting as if he belonged to the same group as the 5 fire tars. The vice chieftain looked at his figure with interest. A goblin would usually be shocked and scared at the sight of us. You're quite an interesting one. It was like he watching a small animal's cute tricks. Myung wiped the grease off his lips and said, I came from a very far place. Don't group me with other goblins. All goblins are the same, what could be different? Myung's expression distorted. I am different. But this land is too harsh to me. I want to get stronger by catching prey that are my level. If you tell me a method, I will compensate you the best I can. The fire tars had been here the longest. They would know exactly what lived where. There was a limit to exploring by himself. Since he might meet an opponent too difficult to handle like now. He was lucky this time. However, he couldn't always be lucky. This land is too barren for a lone goblin to live by himself. The vice chieftain rubbed his chin as he continued. There are bugs that gnaw on the trunk of the pum tree. They dig holes in the ground so it's hard for us to hunt them. If you can deal with them, I'll tell you a way. He offered a deal. Not bad. It wasn't bad to cooperate with the rulers of this territory. If he was to gain their trust, he would be able to find Headley's cow. It was foolish to move without any information, but it wasn't good to stay still either. Myung had to get stronger. Multiple times what he was now. Okay. I'll handle that for you. They made a deal. The vice chieftain said it without any expectations. The pum tree was one of the trees the fire tars took care of, and although it couldn't compare to the world's largest, it was an enormous tree. It was the size of a small mountain, so there were a large number of bugs gnawing on its trunk. There wasn't 10 or 20,000 but a number easily exceeding 100,000. And it was impossible for a single goblin to handle them all. Although it was a joke, the fire tars only thought to pull a prank on this oblivious goblin. No way a goblin could handle this troublesome problem that even we fire tars couldn't handle. The pum tree played a crucial role in the lives of the fire tars. The fire tars were unstable life forms. Unless they calmed the flames with the roots of the pum tree, they would one day be consumed by their own flames and die. And obviously, once the pum tree disappeared, the fire tars would move their territory. 3 years from now. The vice chieftain shook his head. In 3 years, the pum tree would be eaten by the bugs and die. And the fire tars had no way to stop it. There was no way they could burn the pum tree to kill bugs that lived deep in its roots. It was a problem they just tossed to a unique goblin that had appeared. They never expected that a small and weak goblin could handle this problem. Crush! He stomped on the bug that was crawling out. The bug instantly exploded and green liquids sprayed out everywhere. There's no end to this. There was a countless amount of small fist-sized bugs. There looked to be hundreds of bugs crawling out around the mountain-sized tree. Even if he caught them all, it would be difficult to get all the bugs that were below. They look similar to treebeard bugs. Although they looked similar to the treebeard bugs that gnawed on trees, their sizes were significantly larger. Was it because they gnawed on the plum tree? What was more, it was hard to find a place where they had reproduced to such levels. Please give me your orders. Muyong summoned all his undead. Then the blazing spear soldier kneeled and asked while the rest quietly looked at Muyong. The Black Sun warrior. He turned his head to look at the warrior wearing full black armor. He was the strongest out of all the undead he had made until now. If he was created when Horus was alive, it would have been hard for him to have become a death warrior. Points were added because he was a warrior of death. Muyong ordered all his undead. Get rid of all the surrounding bugs. Provided you don't burn the tree. The plum tree was of utmost importance to the fire tars. It almost to the point of deification. It would be a problem if he burned it. And since the fire tars village was close, they would rush here the moment the tree started to burn. I will follow your orders. Knock. Knock. All the undead moved quickly and started to kill the bugs. They killed tens of bugs a second. Just like that, they killed bugs until night, but there was no end in sight. Let's change the method. It seemed that recklessly killing bugs wasn't the answer. With this much, it seemed likely that they reproduced extremely quickly. Muyong understood his mistake and looked at it from a different angle. Treebeard bugs dig a tunnel and lay eggs in one place. As soon as he came to that thought, Muyong quickly opened his mouth. Look for their tunnel. If you search around the tree, there should be a large area dug out. Go in and get rid of all the eggs. There would be no end by simply killing the bugs. He had to get rid of the eggs to stop them from reproducing. However, it didn't take long for him to realize that this method was wrong as well. Exactly 3 days later, Muyong gave up. There were too many eggs. It was the same with the tunnels. Just where did this reproducing ability come from? Muyong looked around. Perhaps it was because the Fire Tars village wasn't far from here, but no monsters came to this place. The only things here were the plum tree and the bugs. However, the thing that was becoming the bugs' food was the tree's roots. Their numbers infinitely increased by eating the roots. I have to handle this. If I can curry favor with the Fire Tars, it will be easier for me in the future. The Fire Tars were the top among the high-ranked monsters. It was a chance to earn their protection. Although they were monsters, he didn't care. Since there were humans who were less than monsters. Above all, they were flaming warriors and he was very interested in their spoils of war. If he was lucky, he might even be able to obtain useful equipment. There are only bugs. Muyong thought carefully. He pondered while even reducing his sleep. A reproduction ability that exceeded common sense. To get rid of the bugs, he had to handle the root cause. After 2 days, a thought suddenly pierced his mind. There were only bugs. Then, there weren't any natural predators. Chapter 47. One of the important variables that made up an ecosystem was the relationship of natural predators. If there weren't any natural predators, unlimited reproduction would destroy the ecosystem and in the end destroy itself. The bugs in front of him were like that. If they ate up all the roots, the bugs would most certainly die. However, the Fire Tar wanted him to just remove the bugs. The art of death skill can't be a solution all the time. He could make the bugs into an undead. At most, he could create 100 of them a day. But most importantly, he couldn't make them multiply like he did with the zombies. Undead is a curse normally cast on humans and other humanoid races. Bugs weren't a humanoid race. Of course, they weren't included. I need natural predators. It seemed necessary for him to make natural predators protect the plum tree. A natural predator of a bug everyone knew was a bird. However, it wouldn't be able to consume a fist-sized bug unless it was quite a large bird. It was hard to get flocks of huge birds immediately. Overpopulated aphids. Muyong picked up a bug and looked at it carefully. As he pressed on the bug's bulging belly, he was able to feel that it was full of water. They had already sucked out the palm tree's sap. Bugs like aphids tended to extend their lives like this. The natural predator of aphids are beetles. He had learned about bugs when he was training to become an assassin. He became proficient at the skills of assassination by using everything including poison, animals, bugs and etc. There were some bugs that were useful depending on the situation. For example, there were bugs of solitude that died when their partner died, some that reacted to a specific sound and some that followed a specific scent. It was a world of infinite possibilities. The Plutonian neon beetle. Soon after, Muyong remembered its name. The Plutonian beetle was a beetle-type monster that lived in the underworld and grew up to 1 meter. It dug up the ground and used its long mouth to eat the aphid-like bugs living underneath the ground. Normally, they were scattered all over the underworld, and although he wasn't sure if these monsters would eat these bugs, he felt it was worth a try. Muyong took out a talisman. Soon, a flock of 100 harpies flew around Muyong. Search as far as you can and find bugs that look like these. Bring them back alive. Muyong drew a picture on the ground. He described its characteristics and ordered the harpies to paralyze the bugs and to bring them to him alive. Harpies possessed a paralyzing poison in their wings. It should definitely be possible for the harpies to fulfill this task, as the Plutonian beetle were very strong. After a day, 30 harpies returned. Muyong knitted his brows after looking at the different types of bugs the harpies brought him. Maybe it was because they were undead, or perhaps it was because they were bird brain, but there were no Plutonian beetles. As time passed, more than 20 appeared, but the situation was the same. Did the others that didn't return die? Muyong was able to see the last few moments when a ghoul or a zombie died. However, he was unable to confirm if the others died, possibly because harpies had small brain capacities. More than half came back alive. But, it was still a relief that this much had come back alive, as they recklessly ventured all over the demon god's territory. He expected only about half to survive, but 70% did. But, there is still a chance. Muyong still held on to this slight chance. Among these, there could be a bug that might react to the giant aphids. He dug a hole and made a tunnel and placed the aphid and the bugs that the harpies brought together. However, it didn't result in any great effect as he hoped. The bugs can't use their strength. It was strange. Did something go wrong when the harpies brought in the bugs? Besides the aphids, all the rest of the bugs didn't move properly. Their movements seemed stiff, as if they were shivering in fear. Every day, Muyong continuously let the harpies out to investigate the cause. And using all the undead, he was restricting the territory of the bugs. It was to protect its roots even a little longer. And after 7 days, Muyong was finally able to get the one he wanted. The Plutonian beetle. Finally, he was able to obtain a Plutonian beetle. Only 10 harpies were left. It was by sheer luck. On top of that, the Plutonian beetle was bearing eggs. Only about 1% of the 1,000 eggs it bore became larvae, but if Muyong could arrange an environment, he could increase it to 10%. However, like the other bugs, the Plutonian beetle's body was stiff. It was scared. What do you think is the problem? I don't know. Muyong questioned the blazing spear soldier as he sat on a rock. Although the blazing spear soldier had the knowledge of fire dragon Wu, it seemed like this problem exceeded his ability. It seemed like it would become a problem if he didn't find the reason why the bugs were scared, even if he did find a natural predator. If he used the Eye of the Sky skill, he would be able to use the knowledge in the Sky Library, but what would he search for if he didn't even know the cause? I have analyzed situations more complex than this. Although it was when he was brainwashed, Muyong was able to succeed in everything from analyzing and infiltrating to assassinating. It wasn't like he couldn't do it anymore. Muyong climbed up the tree. The fire tars would have scolded him if they found out. However, he needed to be daring. Nothing would change if he just stood there. Then Muyong closed his eyes as he assimilated with his surrounding, his body swaying with the wind. The sky was quiet. Even the ground was quiet. This place was especially quiet. Myung shut off his emotions. Even his spirit was shut off. He attempted to become a weak living organism. It was his last resort to find out why the bugs were afraid of this place. However, it wasn't enough. His primal human nature refused. Although Myung had become the wind and the ground as he concealed himself, he never had become a weak living thing like a small animal or a bug. This is also a challenge for me. He challenged unknown fields that he never attempted before. He tried to become weak. To shut off his instincts. It wasn't easy. That was why this was a challenge. Soon, Myung's senses widened and even a distance quite a distance away came into his sight. Bugs that didn't approach him started to climb on top of his body. Myung just stood there like a scarecrow. As time passed, Myung fell into a deeper state of mind. Brrr. Brrr. Myung's body shivered in fear. No bird could approach him. The bugs weren't able to move. He seemed to understand why only the giant aphids were fine. The palm tree suppresses fire attributes. That was right. The giant aphids sucked out all the sap of the tree and neutralized the attributes of fire. That was how they were able to grow so big. The bugs who were instinctively afraid of fire couldn't move. Then, where was the fire? Myung's eyes turned towards the far-away location where a huge village was situated. The problem is the village of Fire Tar. The Fire Tars respected the palm tree. It was natural for them to gather around here. That was the biggest problem. The fire attributes of the Fire Tar were too strong. It didn't subside. Other weak monsters and bugs would follow their instincts and wouldn't approach this location as they feared it. Only the giant aphids were able to be active as the tree neutralized the fire attribute. Myung climbed down from the tree. He quickly walked towards the Fire Tar's village. You really want to get killed, don't you, goblin? Late in the evening, the gatekeeper of the Fire Tar's village greeted Myung at the entrance. It wasn't that welcoming, but Myung didn't even budge. Call out the vice chieftain. I have an appointment with him. There is no reason for our vice chieftain to make an appointment with a goblin. Go away or I will show you why the Fire Tars are known as the most ferocious, ill-tempered race. He tried to scare him. However, Myung was far off from getting scared from that sort of threat. I have solved the secret to why the bugs are eating the roots of the palm tree. If you don't call out the vice chieftain, I will just leave. What? Myung didn't explain twice. He just looked up the giant covered in flames. The gatekeeper could only ponder if this information was true or not. If the goblin was lying, the goblin would die horrifically, but he would also get reprimanded for believing in a goblin. On the other hand, it would become a bigger situation if the goblin was telling the truth. The thing the whole clan wanted the most. For that to become a waste because of him? It wouldn't be able to repay it all with even his life. The gatekeeper decided that it was better to be reprimanded alone than risk the whole village and nodded. If you are lying, I will make you taste all the sufferings offered in this world. I will go to your clan leader and burn him and make sure he never breathes another breath. Call him. A short answer. Myung was calm even when the Fire Tar was spitting fire. Instead, the flames the Hell Horse breathed out were scarier. Fire Tar was a monster few ranks below the Hell Horse. The gatekeeper left huffing and puffing. After 10 minutes, he brought the vice chieftain. The vice chieftain tilted his head to the side as if he never expected Myung to show up. You really found a way to exterminate the bugs. He had said it to play a trick on him. Never in his dreams did he expect Myung to find a solution. Myung spoke clearly. There are 2 ways. There are even 2. The vice chieftain glared at him as if he couldn't believe what Myung was saying. Although the Fire Tars weren't the smartest bunch, they were unable to come up with an answer even after they put their heads together. They tried lots of different ways, but it was still the same. It didn't make sense that Myung solved this in 10 days. What was more, he found two methods. If it was true, it seemed like the pride of the fire tars were going to collapse. First way is to move the pum tree. In a rocky place, bugs can't lay their eggs. It won't be able to bring in enough nutrients and it will dry up quickly, but it will still live 5 more years. That can't ever happen. As he expected. The fire tars believed the tree was sacred. But to pull its roots and to move it, it would be a blasphemy. The vice chieftain's eyes were filled with disbelief, as if he couldn't believe the goblin had said this as a solution. What's the second method? If the second method is also worthless, I will save your life, as I was the one who requested this, but you will face some harsh punishments. The vice chieftain fire tar threatened him. Muyong chuckled out loud. It seemed like their personalities were all similar. They were all ferocious and ill-tempered. Even their threatening routines were the same. Of course, Muyong also didn't think they would choose the first method. Muyong shrugged his shoulders and spoke. Leave this village. Leave this village. The vice chieftain's body trembled. He believed that Muyong was mocking him. Before he exploded, Muyong continued to talk. All fire tars must distance themselves from the pum tree. You also need to reduce the number of times you visit the pum tree. Just in case he didn't understand, Muyong explained. You guys are a hindrance to the pum tree. Chapter 48, Burning Heart, End. TL, Yoni. Edited, Yoni, Mayanai. Sponsored, TOM555J. I can't listen to this any longer. The fire tar vice chieftain burst into flames. His large body shook as the surroundings burned. All fire tars respected the pum tree. For them, the pum tree was an existence they could never live without. The fire tars could only live by neutralizing their fire with the branches of the pum tree. However, Muyong said that it was the opposite for the pum tree. Of course, they were mad. It has already been more than 50 years since we lived here. If we move after listening to a goblin, we'll become the laughing stock of all fire tars. Thump. Vice chieftain stepped forward. As if he was going to kill Muyong if he said another word. Fire tars were warriors who had a very high sense of pride. If they were ever looked down upon, they would have to leave their territory. Clap. Muyong clapped his hands once. Then, the blazing spear soldier brought tens of different types of bugs in a box. If you can't believe me, I will prove it to you. Muyong spoke as if he was doing them a favor. Would anyone refuse when someone said they were going to provide them with proof? Vice chieftain calmed his flames for a moment and spoke. If this is your last excuse, then let's see. Even if he was mad, he never acted out. He tried hard his best to listen to what Muyong had to say. The title of vice chieftain wasn't just for show. This should be worth doing. At least he was willing to listen. That meant that he was more open-minded compared to the other fire tars, and that it would be likely that he would be willing to acknowledge Muyong if he understood his explanation. If vice chieftain was stubborn, the process of making him understand would have been filled with obstacles. First, I need to explain to you the relationship of natural predators. Relationship of natural predators. As fire tars had no natural predators, it might have been hard for them to fully understand this. It seemed like Muyong's thoughts were right. He continued. It's the relationship where one eats another. You guys might not have experienced this before, but it is present in all mammals, bugs and living things that make up the ecosystem. Because of the fire attribute you let out, weak creatures aren't able to get close. Us, fire tars, don't hunt the weak. Muyong shrugged his shoulders. Technically, the natural predators of the fire tars are those large weak aphids. Those huge aphids are the only ones that can move around in the presence of the fire tar's fire attribute. You can see that, unlike those aphids, these bugs can't even move. Just a mere bug. These mere bugs were killing the pum tree. And you guys weren't able to dispose of these bugs. Vice chieftain closed his mouth. It was extremely insulting, but he was still interested in why. If it really was nothing, he could later kill him painfully. Muyong continued to talk. The huge aphids suck the sap of the tree. The roots especially seem effective in neutralizing the fire attributes. The aphids that suck on the sap weren't affected by the fire attribute. On the other hand, Muyong touched the bugs that didn't move as if they were frozen. The other bugs are stricken with fear and can't move. Normally, these would eat the huge aphids and keep a balance in the ecosystem. These small bugs. As if the vice chieftain couldn't believe what Muyong had to say, he bent over to take a look at the bugs. Muyong said these could eat up the aphids that they couldn't get rid of. However, it was only natural that the vice chieftain didn't know anything about this. There were no fire tars who had any interest in the ecosystem. They believed that strength was the best and didn't bother to exchange any knowledge with others. If they had deepened relationships with other races, things might have been a bit different, but fire tars were predators who had no natural predators themselves. Who would dare try to deepen their relationship with them? Of course, even if they were to visit them, it would be rare to find someone who would analyze the situation like Muyong. Afterwards, Muyong took his time to help them understand as he slowly unveiled the secret. On the other hand, the vice chieftain didn't seem enthusiastic. He thought that there was a chance that Muyong might be sweet-talking him with believable words to trick him. However, he had definite evidence. If you won't believe me, I will show you. As if it wasn't hard, Muyong took out a small bottle from his sides. It is the sap I have gathered from the pum tree. If I pour this in the wooden box. Splash! Muyong poured the entire bottle full of sap into the wooden box filled with the bugs. Then, the scared bugs that were unable to move started moving. Afterwards, to fill up their starving bellies, they attacked the huge aphids. Now that they aren't as heavily affected by the fire attributes, they see the aphids as food and start to move. The problem is, once the sap dries, the effect disappears. That's why you fire tars need to move your village. You mean our existence harmed the pum tree? That is so. Muyong was completely cool-headed. As if he was stabbing a knife into their hearts, he continued to talk. You fire tars move to another territory every few decades. I assume it's because of the pum tree. Am I right? The fire tars didn't live in this area 5 years later when Headley's cow was found. If monsters like fire tars were spotted, the information would have already been spread. Muyong believed they moved their territory once the pum tree dried up. As he expected, the vice chieftain nodded. You are right. Same problem continuously occurs when we move to another region near a pum tree. We concentrate on killing the aphids, but we never thought about using the natural predators to naturally restore them. That is also true. You will be able to see fast results when you move your village. Afterwards, you need to make sure that no other fire tars stay near the tree. The Plutonian beetle which was bearing eggs was waiting in a safe place. He was planning to release it once the fire tars moved away. However, he didn't hear an answer he wanted. Both are impossible. Even if your answers were correct, no fire tar is going to listen to a normal goblin. I proposed a method to solve your problem as promised. To act upon it or not, is entirely up to you guys. Muyong really did what he could. The vice chieftain bit his lips as he looked at Muyong's confident attitude. It doesn't seem like he is a normal goblin. All the goblins he knew were scaredy cats. However, Muyong was filled with confidence that all other goblins he had seen so far lacked. Of course, there were few who bragged and called themselves goblin kings, but no goblin could confidently stand in front of fire tars and express his opinion. Honestly, he didn't understand half of what Muyong had said. However, he understood Muyong's sincerity. And saw proof. A new method using the natural predators to solve a problem. Existing fire tars couldn't accept it. If it wasn't for him, they would have already cast him away. However, he saw hope in this new method. Tomorrow, at this time, come to this place. I will tell you the results of a meeting with the tribe. The vice chieftain made his decision. Only he could deliver these matter to the chieftain and open a meeting. Since he was the one who made the promise, didn't he need to take responsibility for it? Myung turned away after he coolly nodded. A war will start. The vice chieftain who was gazing at Myung's back inwardly felt confused. You're telling us to move our village because a mere goblin said so. Do you, the vice chieftain, truly believe this nonsense? The resistance was strong. It was a meeting which was commenced with difficulty. The 6 elders flatly disagreed with his suggestion. He isn't a normal goblin. However, the vice chieftain firmly shook his head. He's still a goblin. He's an existence ranked way below us, fire tars. However, if that goblin can defeat one of our warriors, we will have to acknowledge that he isn't a mere goblin. A goblin to win against a fire tar? It wasn't possible. It would be the same if a goblin king showed up. The fire tars were the peak existence among the creatures living here. There was no one who could fight against them unless they were mirage rank monsters, which were rare. In other words, elders believe that the goblin isn't qualified. As the vice chieftain gathered others' opinions, the chieftains agreed. You're right. The goblin isn't the same rank as us. Who would believe in the words of a goblin who didn't prove his qualifications? Qualifications. Qualifications, they say. It was impossible for a goblin to win against a fire tar. However, if they wanted qualifications, it wasn't like there wasn't a way. Then, will you change your minds if he takes and passes the warrior's trial and prove himself? A goblin is going to partake in the warrior's trial. It's something that has never happened before. It was a negative response. The warrior's trial was one of the processes a fire tar had to pass to be acknowledged as a true warrior. There was no precedent of a goblin taking it in the past. Just when the vice chieftain was feeling frustrated. Thud. Everyone's gazes all turned towards a certain part of the table. The possessor of the fiercest flames. The grand chieftain spoke as he looked around. Let's let him partake in the trial. We will try to listen to what he has to say when he passes the trial. The chieftains were all quiet. The grand chieftain's words were absolute. At least, in this tribe. We need to respect those that have passed the trial. On the other hand, if he doesn't pass, he will not gain any power even if he is right. If what the vice chieftain saw is true, then that goblin will pass, but if he is wrong, he will die inside. The grand chieftain was testing the vice chieftain's judgment. The vice chieftain clenched his fists. However, if you just send him as he is, it's the same as just telling him to die. Let's lower the standard a bit and allow him to use the storage room once like the other users. I will allow that much. The storage room was a place where the tribe had stacked up all the equipment they have earned from hunting and battles over the years. It was custom for the one taking the trial to choose an equipment from the place to use for the warrior's trial. Although there was only a slight chance for a mere goblin to pass the trial, he would still take that chance. The meeting concluded as the vice chieftain heavily nodded. And, the next day had arrived. As soon as the day brightened, Myung returned to the entrance of the village. At the same time, he was guided to a huge underground storage room. It's enormous. Myung's eyes shined as he entered the storage room. A countless number of equipment and accessories were lined up along the endless walls in the storage room. Choose one. While the vice chieftain was watching him, Myung looked around the equipment inside the storage room. There wasn't a single one that wasn't a masterpiece. There were big weapons for fire tars to use, but there were quite a lot that could be used by Myung. An equipment to use when I attempt the warrior's trial. Not bad. On top of that, it would become much easier for him to roam around the demon god's territory after this. As of right now, it would have been impossible for him to fight against a fire tar, but since this was much easier than that, Myung felt it was worth a try. That is. Myung noticed a black aura coming from a direction after walking for a good while. It was similar to the aura that appeared when he used the Art of Death skill. As he walked closer, he found a belt made of bones lying on the floor. Name, Wicked Belt. Rank, A. Classification, A keepable type. Durability, 6818. Restrictions, only the user with a necromancer type classes will be able to check the effects. Effects, the belt which a wicked lich used. Asterisk intelligence +4. Asterisk wisdom +4. Asterisk all undead are strengthened by 5%. After rechecking it a few times, Myung was astonished. This is quite good. Only necromancer type classes were able to see the effects. Equipment with restrictions like this were normally more effective than other equipment of the same rank. Undead strengthened by 5%. It was definitely not a small percentage. Even more, there was no limit on the number. After roaming around the storage room once, he grabbed the wicked belt as he realized it was most suited for him. I will choose this. Are you sure you will be okay with that? It doesn't seem so great. Vice Chieftain looked at him with disbelief. There were much more sparkling treasures in the storage room. He couldn't understand why Myung chose a shabby belt made out of bones among all of these great treasures. This is enough. Don't regret it. The Vice Chieftain clicked his tongue as he headed out the storage room. But on the other hand, Myung was very pleased. I never thought that I would get a real treasure. For Myung, this belt was more valuable than any other treasure in the storage room. Next, Myung headed towards a house right in the middle of the village. When he entered, he saw a large marble. Vice Chieftain spoke. This is the marble of the trial. When you smear your blood and touch it, the trial will begin. Only the ones who pass will return. What happens when I don't pass? You will die or return insane. It was truly simple. Myung took out a small knife and cut his finger. Soon, blood drooled down. Do you have any advice? No more, no less, just block it 10 times. A fire tar that just became an adult have to do it 20 times, but you don't need to do more than that. His words were ambiguous. Myung didn't think long. He nodded and stretched out his hand to touch the marble. Soon, Myung's body was sucked into the marble. Asterisk. Myung looked around. A large arena stood in front of him. And from afar, 100 goblins all armed with weapons were charging towards him. It was a sudden situation. However, Myung wasn't taken back. Instead, the words that instantly appeared were more of an eyesore. The endless battlefield. This was also a place he learned about once humans started to explore this area. However, the endless battlefield was a place that would be discovered at least 10 years later. From what he remembered, many people challenged this place because they would be rewarded following the laws of Solomon depending on their results. Especially, since the specific rewards were limited, the huge groups who knew about this basically monopolized it. He never thought that the marble was a way to get to the endless battlefield. Let's try it. Swoosh. Anguish let out a small cry. Chapter 49, Endless Battlefield, 1. TL, Yoni. Edited, Yoni, Mayanai. Sponsored, TOM555J. Skreek. A group of goblins screamed out loud from afar. Goblins were the lowest ranked monsters that lingered in the very bottom and were nothing but a prey to others. Myung would be sufficient in handling 100 of them alone. However, Myung tried his best even when killing the goblins. He instantly killed the goblins approaching him with all his undead. Try to keep as many corpses intact. Like the name, Endless Battlefield, implied, this was a place where an infinite number of monsters appeared. The more he blocked, the more difficult it became, and if he didn't end it at the right time, he could die in vain. It meant that he had to be good at hit and run, but Myung was curious as to how far he could go. I have the 6 paths and art of death skills. From the 6 paths, the Azura path was a skill that allowed him to handle the crazy spirits. Even though he didn't have many under his control, using it with the art of death skill will allow him to display a much greater strength. Myung was planning to make undead out of the monsters that appeared to prepare for the next wave. From just this, anyone could tell that the endless battlefield was a place meant for Muyong. I accept your orders. Swish! All the undead including the blazing spear soldier massacred the goblins. Leave one alive. A mere 100 goblins. It was like a light exercise after a meal. Although it took a bit longer as he ordered them to try and kill them with their bodies intact, most of the goblins were lying on the floor in less than 20 minutes. Screech! Screech! Muyong cut off the arms and legs of the last surviving goblin. After, he applied medicine to quickly stop the bleeding before he tossed it on the floor. He wasn't the type to enjoy torture, but it was necessary. A trick. The next wave would start when either all the monsters were killed or when a day had passed. When he partook the endless battlefield, one of his tactics was to keep the last monster alive. What was more, Muyong couldn't make many undead in a single day. Even if he used the C-rank art of death skill to the max, he could only use it 100 times. Afterwards, he needed to rest for at least a day. Muyong sat down for a moment after making the 99 monsters into undead. The monsters will strengthen greatly every 10 waves. Technically, Muyong never entered the endless battlefield. But, Muyong knew that one had to enter the endless battlefield a different way each time, as that person would not be able to enter the same way again. I need to beat the 10th wave at least to get a good reward. In 5 years, the great calamity would be prophesized and the giant group would then finally get off their asses. Full-scale exploration of the unknown territories would start, and even then the endless battlefield would only be found after a good while later. After the discovery, the giant groups completely concealed the information and monopolized the rewards. Normal people found out about this much later, when the groups had already swept up all the limited rewards. That was why information was important. Knowing was a strength and not knowing was a sin. I was lucky. He chuckled. It wasn't on purpose. He just thought he could get their favor by helping the fire tars. He never expected to enter the endless battlefield. However, he was only given one chance. He couldn't enter the endless battlefield again by using the marble. He needed to make the most out of this opportunity. We need to make traps by digging up the ground. Drag rocks to make a place for the Avengers to hide. As he ordered them, the undead worked in an orderly fashion. Then, Muyong sat down and tried to calm his body down. He was about to faint after using the art of death skill to the max. Slowly. Let's go as far as I can. It was an extremely advantageous battle for Muyong. It was foolish to purposely push himself too far. Muyong looked far past the 10 waves. The 5th wave were orcs with grey skin. Orcs were low-ranked but were very powerful. They were violent and fierce and even lived in groups. They were quite difficult to fight against unless the person lived in the underworld for at least a year. Growl. Growl. However, the orcs couldn't help but be confused as soon as they appeared. A number of undead several times their size were gathered around them as they greeted them. Attack! Muyong dominated them with his numbers. He finished the orcs off before they were lined up for battle by waiting for them at the starting point of the waves. The initial number of more than 300 undead finally increased to a number over 400. The numbers are starting to drop. After massacring the orcs, Muyong counted the number of undead that were left. Overall, the number increased, but it didn't increase exponentially like it did so far. It was because he had lost a significant number of undead when fighting the orcs. But the effects of this wicked belt's good. Muyong tapped the belt made of bones. One of the effects of the wicked belt was strengthening undead by 5%. Someone might think only 5%, but equipment that raised something by a percentage were extremely rare. A strengthening of 5% was considered quite a high level. It was like 100 monsters having the strength of 105 monsters. It was simple calculations, but as of now, when he had over 400 undead, it was like having 20 freebies. As the numbers increased, the effect of 5% would shine further. Besides, it wasn't like this wasn't the only equipment of its kind. If he could just obtain a bone dragon, death knight, or over lich level top-ranked undead. Muyoung nodded as he thought that far. There's a long way to go. He could never say that the Muyoung right now was strong. He needed to become strong. His thirst for power hasn't been quenched. Muyoung had to face monsters. To kill a monster, they say that you had to become one. That was why Muyoung tried to become one. Let's clean up the corpses and reorganize. The ninth wave were gargoyles. Gargoyles were flying-type monsters. The damage was considerable and the over 600 undead all of a sudden dropped to about 450. The 10th wave is the boss. The monsters that were known as bosses were always strong. Truthfully, if Muyoung was alone, he would have surrendered at the 7th or 8th wave. However, he was confident that he could fight the boss battle as he had hundreds of undead. Gather the bones. Muyoung gathered up all the bones of monsters he had killed so far. Muyoung gestured as he looked at the mountain made up of bones. Soon, dark aura surrounded the bones as he used the Art of Death skill. Let's make a golem. When the rank of Art of Death skill was low, he needed to sculpt them himself. However, now he could shape them just by drawing a mental image of it. Soon, the bones assembled on their own to form a shape. Level, 76. Type, Bone Golem. Strength 88, Agility 45, Stamina 90. Intelligence 15, Wisdom 15. A truly idiotic golem had been created. Muyoung was quite pleased. It was created into a figure he had in mind. He wished for it to pass an art score of 70, but as expected, it was a score that couldn't be easily broken with the materials in his imagination. Normally, bosses are pre-arranged unless if it was a special case. There is a high possibility that an orc warkif or a troll watch would appear. To fight against an orc warkif or a troll watch, a golem like this was necessary. Even if it was simply used to compete by strength and to buy some time. I will dominate the boss with the Black Sun Warrior. Muyoung turned his head and looked at the Death Warrior in full armor. The Black Sun Warrior was clearly managing the workload of many by himself. He was currently Muyoung's strongest card. He was currently strengthened with the Sorceress of Lightning's rune buff and the Wicked Belt and was much more powerful. Any decent mid-ranked monster wouldn't be able to do anything in front of him. After a day passed, another wave had started. Orc Warkif. Its entire body was dark red and was 1.5 times bigger than a normal orc. It was holding a massive great sword and covered its face with bare hide. Dark red Orc Warkif. It wasn't a typical orc. Dark red. They seemed to be a level stronger than a typical orc group. He didn't know why it was unusual, but it was very different from what he expected. Muyoung frowned as he gave out an order. Bone Golem, go. The rest suppress the surrounding orcs. However, he couldn't just wait and see. Muyoung took out Anguish and fought against the dark red orc warkif with his 450 undead. The Bone Golem shattered. The Black Sun Warrior was dangerously fighting against the orc warkif. The resistance was stronger than he thought. Not to the point of losing. However, Muyoung made objective judgments about the situation. Although the impact was bigger than he expected, it wasn't enough for him to be defeated. It was definitely enough to be handled. Sorceress of Lighting, use your rune explosion. Then, tens of undead bloated up and exploded. And on top of that, Muyoung placed spirits. Azura Path. The crazy spirits and the explosion was an amazing combination. It was enough to make a low-rank undead suddenly change into a mid-rank. Of course, the drawbacks were that he could only use it once and that his body wouldn't be able to handle it if he used it on an important undead, but for now, it was enough to raise his military strength. After losing about half of his undead, Muyoung was finally able to pierce Anguish into the head of the dark red orc warkif. Soon after, the Black Sun Warrior stabbed its side. Thump! A black light appeared as the orc warkif fell on the ground. This is... Muyoung grabbed hold of the light as he stretched his hand out. Indeed, there really was a spirit of dark light. Like this, it seemed like he could add spirits if he killed special monsters. The conquest rate was terrible, but it was more important that the rate was constantly increasing. "Who are you?" At that moment, Muyong stepped back as he heard a voice next to him. "A fairy." A small figure with 2 sets of dragonfly wings. The cute appearance was definitely a fairy. "It's not yet the time for a human to step in here. Please, stop here." "Who are you?" "I'm the fairy who's in charge of the endless battlefield. In here I'm unbeatable, so it wouldn't be wise to be hostile towards me." And the fairy cleared her throat. "The tuning of the endless battlefield isn't completed. We are testing with monsters, but how did you enter here?" And then she tilted her head. Well, it did seem a bit odd that fire tars had a marble that led to the endless battlefield. Even if they did call it the warrior's trial, it didn't they seem like they didn't exactly know about the marble themselves. It seemed like they were tuning the level of difficulty with monsters like the fire tars. This was the reason why humanity could enter the endless battlefield about 10 years later. However, Muyong never heard that there was a fairy in charge of the endless battlefield. The fairy placed her hands on her hips and continued. "If you get out now, I will give you a nice necklace. Let's see." She looked into her pouch and repeatedly took out different items and put them back in. Different items continuously came out as if it was an infinity pouch. Among them, there were some that were special and others that were normal. Fairies tended to be a bit dense. The fairy in front of him was the same. "This. I don't need it." Muyong shook his head right away as the fairy took out a necklace. The fairy pouted her lips. "Ah, why? This is really good. It's a B++ rank and a set item. I never knew you would be able to beat the dark red orc Warkif. That's why I was specially giving it to you, so take it. After all, this will be your limit as a human. How many waves do I need to stop before I can earn a little wish?" The fairy was startled and her eyes widened. However, Muyong caught a glimpse of the item when the fairy was looking through her pouch. The item that was shaped like a cloud. Little wish. It allowed 3 small wishes to be made. Chapter 50, Endless Battlefield, 2. Of course, he couldn't ask for a huge wish that could disrupt the system. However, it was useful in various of different ways, from finding something, to tell the difference between a truth and a lie, and even increasing his stamina in the case of an emergency. Of course, it falls short of a wish, but depending on how I use it, it could definitely be worth having. Wish was one of the highest powers, while Little Wish was a degraded version of it. The past during the final territorial war, so 30 years before Muyong was first summoned, one of the women revered as a saint used her own life as a medium to make a wish. It could literally be called a god's blessing, as it displayed a strength so powerful that it stuck 2 demon gods to death. The highest power that took out tens of thousands of demon soldiers and brought small victory to humans. Afterwards, the saint's name carried power. The next saint hadn't appeared yet, but in 5 years, Snow would appear and prophesize the great calamity. With that, she would rally up the humans, but she died with the appearance of a legion of the demon god of the 64th seat, Ors. Muyong saw that scene right in front of his eyes. If the legion didn't kill the saint, I would have. That was Muyong's assignment. To kill the saint. However, Saint Snow wasn't able to use the highest power like the past saint. If she did use a wish, at least one of the Demon King's legions would have been demolished. He didn't know why. There were rumors floating that it was because Snow wasn't human. Snow was a mutant who had skin white as snow and wings of both the angel and the devil. Where she was born and where she came from, no one knew. Even Muyong didn't know. If it's Little Wish, I might be able to figure out who Snow is. Even if it was the degraded version of Wish, Little Wish was still an amazing tool in its own way. For 5 years, tens of thousands of clerics practiced together to just barely make one. From what he knew of, they stopped making them when they had about 3 made, as it wasn't worth the amount of effort that was needed. He never thought he would find one of the few in a place like this. It might be possible to reveal Snow's identity which no one had ever found out about. The fairy calmed her expression and scratched her cheeks as she spoke. Ahem, this is a special reward. Special reward? I can't tell you the condition. Because I'm not allowed to just tell people. Then, I'll get punished. What I can give you was just that necklace, that's the best I could do. Then, you don't have to just tell me. Is there anything you want? There were a lot of uses for Little Wish. He could find the location of the Headley's cow and the specific whereabouts of where the other 2 rings that would release the S-rank weapon, Diabolos, were. Like with Headley's cow, he wasn't sure of the exact whereabouts of the other 2 rings, Oris's throne ring and Hamel's rune ring, even though he had the lunatic sovereign's ring. So it was more important than any other reward. As Myung asked, the fairy laughed playfully. Well I might let you know if you guess my name correctly. Myung frowned. Fairies were normally very playful species. They were also the species which no one knew anything about. However, he could understand that the answer was quite simple just by talking with her for a bit. I need to keep talking with her. Myung shrugged his shoulders. Although it didn't seem like she would say her name right away, she might let it slip as they continued their conversation. What's the reason for having you, a fairy, manage the endless battlefield? Shucks, is this your first time entering a trial like this? There should be quite a few places made by fairies. I don't really remember entering those places. It was true. After Myung had finished his assassination training, he had been continuously running around assassinating people until he died. He never had time to enter a trial and clear it. The fairy became boastful. Well, you do look like a very weak human. Then, I will specially explain it for you. When I make a successful trial and manage it, I can get a home. A home? That's it. What do you mean that's it? We fairies all don't have a home. We're all poor. But, if fairies get a lot of homes, they can even make a castle and bridges to create a world. However, we fairies don't have anything right now. It seemed like she was trying to say that she had no home to go to. Her shoulders dropped and she pouted her lips. A new fairy king was born, but since we're all poor, so he doesn't have a home. We fairies need to work hard to get a home soon. Solomon promised that he will give us a home if we fairies make good trials and run them well. We can be free from being poor. Although he couldn't really understand what she was saying, he could see that she was desperate. Myung thought that he probably had never heard of stories regarding fairies as they created and managed trials properly and earned their homes. They were adjusting the balance of the endless battlefield by using monsters to test them. Then, most of the trial were probably made by fairies. No wonder. He thought that although the trials were meant to develop humans, they were too difficult. If these playful fairies made them, then he totally understood. Solomon is dead. Wouldn't you only earn a home when he is alive? Doesn't matter. He already stamped and signed it. Even after his death, if we fairies just keep our promise, then we get it. We fairies are poor and have nothing to lose, so we will act even more aggressively to get it. Amazing. Wahee. She seemed like she was weak to compliments. Myung looked around the endless battlefield and spoke. This is well made. You should be able to earn a home soon. Of course. I will certainly earn a home and be free from being a poor. He could felt her overflowing will. What are you going to call your home? She made a wide smile as if she was imagining it in her head for a moment. Wahee. Ahem, I don't fall for those leading questions. However, she instantly placed a serious look on her face. Myung clicked his tongue in disappointment. I can only try to lead her while talking to her like this. But, at least she didn't plan on leaving. Even if she puffed out her cheeks like she was tricked, it seemed like even the fairy had something she was curious about. But, are you really going to try and block the next wave too? The trial isn't balanced completely, so you might die. I will do it. The fire tar told him that he just needed to block the 10th wave. However, Myung was planning to stop at least the 15th wave. The rewards change after the 15th wave. He was planning to find out about the special reward was in the meantime. There will be waves that won't work even if you have a lot of undead, good luck. It's quite fun to watch a foolish human die. You have bad taste. Wahihi. Myung frowned. Only 12 hours had passed but the next wave had started all of a sudden. She said they didn't finish the balancing the trial. The endless battlefield wasn't smooth yet. It could definitely be different from what he remembered. The monsters that appeared as soon as the wave started were strong. Werewolves were quick and fast. A normal undead wouldn't be able to catch up to them. On top of that, the arch-goblins were mutants born under the holy blessing. Get up! Crunch! Growl! Myung woke all his undead up. In total, 312. It was heartbreaking to have lost about a half of his undead during the 10th wave. However, it wasn't only a bad thing. Dark Red Orc Warkif. Myung looked at the dark red orc Warkif that was swinging its great sword at a werewolf in the front. The art score the orc Warkif received was 68. Maybe because its score was low or maybe because it didn't have a great story compared to the Dark Sun Warrior, but it did have a drive greater than anyone else. Blazing Spear Soldier, you will kill the arch-goblins with me. I understand. The arch-goblins with the holy blessing were the natural enemies of undead. Myung that the spear soldier, who was still alive, and himself would be able to fight more freely than the rest. There were 5 completely white, albino goblins mixed into the werewolves. Myung took a deep breath and wore the lunatic sovereign's set and swung anguish. Slash. He was able to complete the 13th wave, the 14th wave and finally, the 15th wave. However, the situation wasn't great even though he was on a roll. Now, he only had about 200 undead. If he continued, the important undead that Myung made could all disappear. The reason was clear. Arch-goblins. The art of death skill didn't work on the arch-goblins that received the holy blessing. Since they couldn't be turned into undead, they didn't help increase his military strength. It could only be exhausting as they were contrasting attributes. However, as the difficulty increased, the numbers increased as well. Wow! Did you block the 15th wave? You really are amazing. Even if you used your undead, it would have been very difficult. The fairy continuously watched Myung fight as she strolled around him. If I didn't fight against the arch-goblins, this would have been over already. Myung knew exactly what he needed to do. That it was most efficient for him to take care of the arch-goblins. Is there be a chance that the wait time between the waves will get shorter? Wahihi, I can't tell you information about the endless battlefield. If you're scared, you can stop now. I think I can go a bit further. Do you really want to die? Well, it's good for me as I have more to see. Myung chuckled. He could not feel any ill will from the fairy. It was in their nature. Name. A name, hey. Then, Myung decided to deduce what the fairy's name could be. The past few days, he thought of a few candidates for what her name could be. There was no way that she would suddenly ask him to guess what her name might be. She probably thought that he could guess her name correctly through their conversation. There was always an answer to a trial. And if a fairy made it, the answer had to be within their conversations up until now. Could it be? However, the candidates he had narrowed down so far were all guesses. But, there was nothing else to learn from the conversation. He had to make a decision. Wahi. Isn't it? What is? Your name? The fairy's eyes widened. How did you know? It seemed like he was correct. Myung shook his head as if he was at a loss for words. I didn't think a fairy's name would be hard to guess. Fairies are known to not tell their names to anyone, but their actions are very flawed. I thought that there was no need to let someone know about it when they kept saying their names out loud. You're right. My name is Wuhi. Because I laughed Wuhi, when I was born, I became Wuhi. The fairy, Wuhi's shoulders sank low. It truly was the simplest way to recognize her name. Myung calmly asked. What's the condition for the special reward? It was time to hear about the conditions in earning Little Wish. Wuhi twirled her hair with her finger as she spoke. You wouldn't be able to even if I told you. Stop talking nonsense and speak. Hing, you need to stop 3 waves continuously in a condition where you're barely alive. Indeed, he understood why she said he couldn't do it if he knew. Maybe if it was in the beginning, but as of right now when he was on his 15th wave, it probably was impossible to fulfill that condition. However, Myung nodded. Myung could get even stronger when he is in a state where he was barely alive. Lunatic warrior. Stir up the battlefield after becoming a crazed warrior. He didn't know if it was possible, but he had to make it possible even if wasn't.